Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Dale Matchek. I'm the chairman of the economics department here at Northwood University and the director of our Freedom Seminar series. This is the last event of the academic year for our Freedom Seminar, and I want to thank all of you who supported it. And for those of you who are here for the first time, especially you students, if you did not sign up for the Freedom Seminar this year, you might want to consider signing up for it in the fall. It is an honors course. You do have to qualify, but I think I talked to the students who are in the class. It is a kind of unique course offering here at Northwood because we do bring in distinguished guest people like the ones we have here tonight throughout the course of the semester. And you'll see tonight what a powerful difference that can make in your intellectual development. So tonight's topic, freedom and political ideology. So every, political ideology talks about freedom. It has a positive connotation. It doesn't matter whether it's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Karl Marx, Milton Friedman. They all talk about freedom, but for people with such diverse political perspectives or economic perspectives, can they possibly be talking about the same concept? What does freedom mean in this context? By the way, I should remind all of us to silence our phones. What it means, it doesn't mean just autonomy. Your life is yours. Do what you want. Does it mean freedom to be something, perhaps to develop your virtues and become the kind of person that humans are meant to be? Does it mean having the resources you need to make meaningful choices in life and perhaps develop your potential? So what does freedom mean? What is it for? How is it attained? Very different perspectives on this. And tonight we're going to hear about three such perspectives. So we're going to hear about the libertarian perspective, the conservative, and the socialist perspective on freedom and human flourishing. And I think it's going to be an interesting discussion. So the way it's going to run is I will invite each member of the panel to come up here and explain a little bit about a particular ideology and why they think that it leads to human flourishing. And after everyone's had a chance to have their say, then we'll turn to you folks, or if you're watching online, we'll take questions online for the panelists. And I've also invited them to ask questions or challenge statements made by each other. And that's the interactive portion of the program. So let me introduce you to our panelists. First of all, Matthew Erard. Matthew. He is a lawyer practicing law in Detroit. He's a people's lawyer specializing in constitutional litigation. But he's also been active for many years in the Socialist Party of Michigan. He served as the state chair or the state secretary of that party for more than 20 years, as well as various national positions in the Socialist Party USA. He has served on the Detroit Downtown District Citizens Council. He's authored many Socialist Party statements and articles in various publications, socialist publications. He's the founder of the Michigan Third Parties Coalition, and he presently serves on the board of the Coalition for Free and Open Elections. He earned his bachelor's degree in political science and sociology from the University of Michigan and his Juris Doctorate from Wayne State University Law. So please welcome Matthew Erard. Next we have Nathan Schleuter, who is a professor of philosophy and religion at Hillsdale College. His BA in history is from Miami University of Ohio, and he has his master's and PhD in politics from the University of Dallas. He's the co-author with Nikolai Wenzel of Selfish Libertarians and Socialist Conservatives, the foundation of the Libertarian Conservative debate, which students who have registered for the Freedom Seminar has been their primary textbook for this term. So, they'll be familiar with his work. His articles have appeared in First Things, Touchstone, Logos, Public Discourse, and Perspectives in Political Science. He's also published many numerous academic articles. He's been a fellow of the National Endowment for Humanities and the James Madison Program in American Ideals at Princeton University. Would you please welcome Nathan Schleuter? Finally, we have Dr. Robert Murphy, who is a senior fellow with the Mises Institute and also serves as the chief economist in financial tech company called Infinio. And he's the author of many books, including Contra Krugman, Smashing the Errors of America's Most Famous Keynesian, Chaos Theory, Lessons for the Young Economist, Choice, Cooperation, Enterprise, and Human Action, and the Politically Incorrect Guide to Capitalism. He received his BA in economics at Hillsdale College and his PhD in economics at New York University. And he has also been ranked as the 11th most influential person in economics by Academic Influence. Perhaps that's because of the weekly podcast that he hosts for the Mises Institute. Will you please welcome Robert Murphy? So I'm going to start with Matthew Erard and invite him to the podium to discuss the meaning and benefits of socialism. Thank you.
Hello. As the great revolutionary Marxist thinker and organizer Rosa Luxemburg once said, freedom is always and exclusively freedom for the one who thinks differently. At this campus, in this particular panel, I suppose that would be me. But I do hope to perhaps convince a few more of you to think differently as well, or maybe some of you already do. And I also started with that quote because I think it illustrates the fact that in the present stage of late capitalism, socialists and Marxists have just as much claim to the values of classical liberalism as either of the two other positions being presented here. By classical liberalism, I mean values such as political equality, civil liberties, democracy, and personal autonomy. And socialism is no different with respect to embracing those. Socialism could be said to be the realization of liberal values stifled by the contradictions of capitalism. Now, an important question is what is capitalism? What are we talking about when we use that term? Contrary to what's often taught in school, capitalism is not based on the market, but rather a particular form of exploitation. Indeed, markets existed long before the capitalist system arose. The purpose of economic production in capitalism is to take money, turn it into a commodity, and then transform that into a greater amount of money, as opposed to merely the exchange of commodities as one would have in an ordinary market. And to generate new value, to cause that initial investment to become a greater amount of money, requires the exploitation of living labor. And I say living labor to distinguish it from dead labor, from the instruments of production, from tools and raw machinery, which already have their value as an input through their purchase by the capitalist. And rather than selling each product produced to an employer, as one would in a market relation, the worker rents his capacity to work or his labor power in exchange for a wage or salary under a command relation. So unlike chattel slavery, in which humans were owned as property, capitalism is based on wage slavery, in which labor or the labor power is a commodity. And as with all other commodities, labor has both an exchange value and a use value. Its exchange value is the same as that applicable to all commodities. That is the average labor time necessary for its production and reproduction. And as applied to the individual worker, that's the average labor time necessary to produce that worker's own means of subsistence or to keep the worker working at their customary standard of living. But labor power has a very peculiar use value, in fact, a unique one, in that it is itself a source of value, and its consumption creates new value. So during the working day, even though it may appear that you are earning a certain amount for each hour that you work, your working day is actually divided between socially necessary labor time, where you produce the value of what you're actually paid in your wage or salary, and then surplus labor time, which is the time that you work just to produce profits for your employer. So as a condition to maintain her own subsistence, a worker must work a portion of her daily labor time gratis to generate profits for her employer. And an equally important consideration is what that surplus labor time represents, why it's valuable. The valorization of surplus labor time as the basis of profit generation stems directly from the fact that mass production provides the material basis for human labor to be freed from the realm of necessity and put toward free and creative self-activity. Hence, capitalism is in essence a vampiric system. It is fueled by the appropriation of personal autonomy. With respect to my initial theme that I started with, capitalism operates not to foster classical liberal values, but rather to feed on their alienation. So capitalist society is divided into two major classes. One is the working class, which consists of all those who work for a living and have nothing to sell but their capacity to work. That's regardless of color or education. The vast majority of the population are members of the working class. And the other dominant class is or a significant class is the capitalist class, or the bourgeoisie, that wields private ownership over virtually all major economic industries and draws profits from the unpaid labor of those who work. There are also subclasses. There's the petty bourgeoisie, or the middle class, which consists of small business owners who are becoming increasingly obsolete as they're crushed by big capital. And then there's the new middle class, which consists mostly of middle managers and supervisors, those who reproduce the existing relations of production and class domination. And there's a subclass of the working class, that's the lumpen proletariat, which consists of those who are unemployed or excluded from the ordinary labor market in order to have a reserve army to push downward pressure on those on members of the working class. Often that determination is made on the basis of discrimination with respect to race, national origin, etc. And as a result of this class system and the system of private ownership of all of the major engines of the economy, we have vast inequality. Today, just 3 billionaires own more wealth than the bottom half of the US population, and the top 400 families own more wealth than the bottom 2/3. Today, 45% of all new income in the US goes to the top 1%. And over just the past 30 years, the top 1% has increased its wealth by 21 trillion, while the bottom half of Americans have lost 980 billion. More than 44 million Americans suffer hunger every year, and nearly 200,000 died of poverty-related causes each year prior to the pandemic. Globally, the richest 1% own over half the world's wealth, while the bottom half of the world's population owns less than 1%. At core, capitalism capitalism is also effectively incompatible with democracy in any meaningful sense. In essence, capitalism is like feudalism and slavery, being it preceding forms of class society. Capitalism is a system where those who produce the surplus have no say in how it is distributed. And beyond that, the vast majority of the real power structure in society is never up for election. The structure of corporations and workplaces where we spend most of our lives is antithetical to democracy, with power exercised directly from the top down. Throughout society, public welfare is always subordinated to the interest of private profits. Capitalism is really devoid of democracy substantively, even in the political system. As a 2014 Princeton University study found, the preferences of the average American have a near zero, statistically insignificant effect on policy. Capitalism also inevitably leads to an extreme concentration of economic power. And with that, along with the absence of economic planning and the insatiable need for capital accumulation, inevitably results in recurring economic crises, devastating millions of workers at a time, and imperialist military and economic interventions to dump overaccumulated investment capital and drive down the price of labor. Even more alarmingly, at this present time, capitalism provides no solution for the environmental crisis. Under capitalism, industrial firms must pursue constant and exponential growth and capital accumulation in a cancerous way to stay afloat, while treating all environmental pollution and resource depletion as market externalities. But the climate emergency requires the exact opposite at this juncture, a period of managed degrowth through rational economic planning to get us off fossil fuels and greenhouse emissions as soon as possible, with very little time left. It also bears keeping in mind that there is a very strong probability that Republican institutions will not withstand the climate crisis. Given the extreme scarcity and upheaval that is expected to occur, it's very likely that something approaching despotism or fascism would come to fruition. And in that event, socialism would be the only one of the three systems here which could actually sustain democratic governance. Now, socialism is an international movement by the working class to extend democracy from the political system to the economy and the workplace through social ownership and democratic economic planning and worker self-management of all major industries and financial institutions. And as the real stalwarts for fiscal discipline, socialists seek to eliminate the soaring cost of maintaining a superfluous and parasitic ownership class and its out-of-control entitlements, both in the form of public subsidization and in siphoning the proceeds of our unpaid labor. And socialists are also for a system that treats you like an adult, unlike the current nanny regime of micromanagement and top-down control over most of our waking hours. Most fundamentally, socialists stand for the proposition that in a free society, people should have a right to have a say in the important decisions affecting their lives and their time. Socialists also support production for use and human need rather than private profit. This means democratic planning over what to produce and how much in accordance with social needs and environmental sustainability. It also assures full employment at fair compensation for everyone who wants to work. And while socialists are the first to defend civil liberties and free expression, we also aim to transcend classical liberalism's confinement to only negative liberty, meaning freedom from external restraints, and to supplement it with positive liberty, which enshrines the freedom to exercise one's fundamental rights and pursue one's free and full development. This includes making radical democracy a part of daily life, including the workplace, rather than a ritual that one engages in merely every 2 or 4 years. And it also means recognition of things like healthcare, nutrition, leisure time, and digital communication as inalienable rights. To quote Marx and Engels, in place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Thank you.
Set my clock here for 15 minutes. That was our allotted time. So thank you, Dr. Matchik, for bringing me here. It's a pleasure to be among my friendly competitors here at Northwood from Hillsdale. You've got a really special place here. So thank you for inviting me. I did not bribe Dr. Matchik to set up the debate the way he did, but it is to my advantage, I think. The way he set up the question was, which of these particular philosophies most promotes human flourishing? And once we raise the question that way, I think I get some advantages for conservatism, because I think that conservatism uniquely asks the question about what institutions promote human flourishing, which do not. Whereas I think socialism and libertarianism are not primarily concerned with human flourishing. They're concerned with either liberty on the one hand or equality on the other, even if that comes at the expense of human flourishing. I think both socialism and libertarianism engage in their own way in a kind of fact-free moralizing, in a way that doesn't actually account for all of the costs of the particular commitments that they make. So to answer the question, we have to say, what is flourishing, right? I want to respond to the question, what is flourishing? And let me just offer some facts, I think, about human flourishing. If you are suffering a severe mental illness, you are not flourishing. If you are addicted to drugs, you are not flourishing. If you are suicidal, you are not flourishing. If you are homeless, you are not flourishing. If you suffer extreme loneliness and isolation, you are not flourishing. If you are in terrible poverty and you're hungry, you are not flourishing. If you're unable to succeed in school, to pay attention, to read, to other things, you're not flourishing, okay? So we've got to agree on like what it means to flourish and not flourish. And I think what I just said is quite plausible, and I think it's also the case that when we look around America today, we're seeing some real challenges with flourishing. America is in the midst of a deep, deep crisis right now. What are the causes? Well, I'm going to offer another fact. I'm trying to offer fact moralizing instead of fact-free moralizing. What are some things we know? One thing we know, one thing we have more evidence for than almost anything else about the causes of almost all of those pathologies I just mentioned is that the strongest correlation is not race, it's not income or class, it's not education, it's marriage. If you are from an intact biological marriage, I mean a marriage in which the man and the woman got married and stayed married and are your biological parents, you have the strongest statistical chances to succeed in school, to get a job, to be free of abuse, to be self-sustaining and supporting, to flourish in all kinds of ways that are contrary to the ones I just listed. Now, don't take my word for this. Look up Brad Wilcox. He is the sociologist, director of the Marriage Institute at the University of Virginia, not a Christian school, not a Christian institute. They've published multiple studies on this. Wilcox has a new book out. I love the title, Get Married, Why We Should Defy the Elites. But he does that. This is not a secret within sociology. There's overwhelming evidence on these correlations. And in my view, both libertarians and socialists have not only not helped the marriage culture, they have actually positively harmed it with the positions that they have taken for either exaggerated views of liberty or exaggerated views of equality. Things like no-fault divorce, in which we saw a rapid escalation of divorce rates, which clearly were damaging to the children of those marriages, and which have only recently leveled off. An ideology of just sort of marriage is just an institution for adult fulfillment of desires, and we should expand it, change the definition to include same-sex couples, include plural couples. New York Times, every week they've got a new piece about celebrating polyamory and plural marriages, when all the data is there for what I'm saying. For their part, socialists have always been slightly suspicious of family and marriage because they are a source of deep inequality. It's just a fact that kids who are from married households are going to have different advantages because of what the kind of attention their parents pay to them. So we have seen a kind of parallel lines of the breakdown of marriage and the increase in these pathologies I'm talking about. So what I want to make clear then is that what we know as a fact is that marriage is the best institution for the reproduction and care of children, for their flourishing. And we also know that that form of marriage, that is monogamous heterosexual marriage, is the best institution we know for the just and fair and equal treatment of sexual differences between men and women. So justice demands for human flourishing the recognition, protection, and promotion of true marriage, and it's unjust to the children who are not born in there to not do that. Now, I think marriage is just a microcosm of other larger issues between conservatism on the one hand, which I'm defending, and libertarianism and socialism. Libertarianism, as I said, makes liberty the good that trumps every other good. It seeks to maximize liberty, and it's not asking whether that maximization is going to promote flourishing or not. In fact, a libertarian might reply, if you choose to be homeless, that's your choice. Flourishing is just what you choose. If you choose to be a drug addict, that's your choice. That's your free choice. That's how libertarians see this. What I want to suggest is that the paradox is that insofar as a society becomes more libertarian in the sense that marriage breaks down, you're going to need more government to take care of the disorder caused by that breakdown. Neutrality is impossible. Libertarians favor the good of liberty against all others, and that causes other goods to suffer. Libertarianism, I think, rests upon an ideology of a kind of autonomous individual who's somehow prior to and independent of the institutions and commitments that he is involved in. And I just want to observe just that is another sort of gross error. What child just sprung fully mature and developed from their mother's womb, speaking eloquently and reading fluently and ready for a job? All of us are born severely dependent, and we require the care of others, not just for our bodies, but for our souls. And so our whole flourishing is nested within a set of caretaking obligations that we did not choose, but we need to acknowledge and recognize. Again, I'm talking about flourishing here. I think that libertarians tend to overlook the fact that we are embedded in a society that has a moral ecology. and that our individual choices affect others in profound ways. They have spillover effects. And so there are claims in justice to protect the kind of ecology that allows us to flourish, just as we prevent polluters and others from inflicting pollutants into our bodies. And we can talk more about this later. What about socialism? The problem with socialism, which again, like socialism and libertarianism, I think are ideologies in the sense that they are committed to an abstract principle, whatever the cost. And so socialism's principle is equality. Now, my view is that socialism, the problem with socialism is it's not social enough. We are profoundly social. Sociality is in our nature. We need others radically, but that sociality is not realized and enacted through collective action, coercive associations like government. That socialization is deeply enacted in all these intermediary voluntary associations within civil society, for business, for sports, for leisure, for debate, for learning, like what happens here. The danger is that socialism threatens to crowd out all of those voluntary institutions and to leave just naked individuals and coercive collective bodies. And that is not a great situation. The history of socialism is not, attempts to implement socialism are not hopeful. Socialism suffers two problems. I'm sure Professor Murphy will mention them. The knowledge problem and the virtue problem. And we should talk about more about those as well. But I want to meet my timeline here and honor that. So conservatism, I'm defending conservatism. And my position is that conservatism is not an ideology. Conservatism, so what do we mean by conservatism? There are all kinds of conservatism. Conserve what? I'm talking about conserving the American political founding principles and tradition. That's what I think deserves conserving. Why? One reason is because it's ours. And I'd like to say more about that, and I will if we have time in Q&A. But a second reason is because it's good. It's a good tradition. What makes it good? The American founding principles are a form of classical liberalism. But it's a form that sought to gather all of the best aspects of the Western tradition and improve them. It's a fusing together of reason and tradition to promote human flourishing. And so it gives us things like the rule of law, institutional restraints like separation of powers, federalism, civil and religious liberty, protection of markets, but it embeds them within a kind of moral framework that promotes our own and unleashes our energetic pursuit of our flourishing in cooperation with others in civil society. Alexis de Tocqueville describes this beautifully. Tocqueville is America's Hayekian, even though that is an anachronism. But if you know Hayek's work, and I'm a big fan of Hayek, I think Hayek is firmly on the side of the position I'm defending here. Tocqueville describes a sort of robust, energetic flourishing that's happening in 19th century America, and the associations and the energy and the creativity that we all are beneficiaries of as we develop and grow. What a beautiful vision of society, and it's not over. It's not too late. I was going to read a quote. I see that I don't have it in my materials right here in front of me, but several years ago, I read a piece by the sociologist Michael Emerson. He's a well-known sociologist, and he tells a story of having a Chinese delegation come visit because they were wondering how religious institutions operate in America. And they visited Houston. And in their visit to Houston, they were exposed to this incredible, robust set of activities that were going on in Houston, helping out at food pantries, food kitchens, helping the handicapped, veterans, teaching children, caring for children, helping immigrants, teaching languages, just this incredible operation. And none of it was the government. It was all private endeavors. And the Chinese, when they heard it and looked, he says, were just stupefied. Like, how does that happen without government? Like, doing the work. They couldn't understand it. And I think there's a lesson there that possibility is still there. Final point. What are some things I would recommend we do, practically speaking, to nudge us back in the conservative direction? Because I want to make clear that we're in a very bad state right now, not just with marriage. I am not advocating some kind of status quo right now. I think probably one thing all three of us share on this panel is a dissatisfaction with the status quo. And one way or another, I think we are profoundly worried and concerned about the way things are now. Just a few things off the top of my head. I think we need to restore recognition and protection of natural marriage. I already said that, and support it. I think if we don't do that, we're not going to fix the other things. I think we need to robustly support this school choice movement. So we see it gaining momentum, unexpected even 3 years ago. And now it's becoming a powerful mechanism by which individuals can start to energetically organize and take responsibility for the common good in a way that they had not before. I love promoting right to work laws, allowing people the freedom to not have to be subject to forced collective bargaining and making their employment decisions. I would love to see the entire administrative state dismantled. Okay, now I'm dreaming. But one of the important things about, that Hayek, the libertarian side shows are the ways in which voluntary associations can actually really do the work that we think only government can do. But it can do it better, and maybe we can talk about that. Last thing has slipped my mind, and my alarm just went off. So thank you, and I look forward to a good conversation.
Okay, likewise, I'll set my alarm here too for 15 minutes because we need the liberty to speak our minds, but we need constraints, right, for order. So thanks everybody for coming to this event. I appreciate it. I'm glad that here at Northwood, they're sponsoring this forum. I also should acknowledge that it takes courage for Mr. Erard to come here knowing he's probably the odd man out, as he says, so I do respect him for that. So let me sort of abuse my position here since I got to hear them go. Let me very quickly just respond to two main points they made just to showcase why I think the libertarian position is able to deal with the issues they're bringing up much more nimbly. And then I'll sort of go to my prepared remarks and try to give you the basic framework, the conceptual underpinning of my particular responses here. So I think what Nathan, Professor Schleuter said here is one of his big things was the dissolution of marriage, or the downfall of marriage. And so right there, I think that's a great example. That's like libertarian exhibit A in terms of showing how faulty government policies promote social decline. So in particular, I think there's great empirical evidence, the case to be made. I know Thomas Sowell talks about this a lot, that, for example, the black nuclear family was actually stronger than their white counterparts in the early 1900s. You might not have expected that, right, with the legacy of slavery and then later, restriction, segregation, and Jim Crow and so forth. But that was historically the case. But now, of course, like the rate of, what used to be called illegitimacy, now they just mean like a single mother raising children in a household, that is much higher in minority communities than in white counterparts. And you see it statistically that it has to do with the so-called war on poverty, where the government began paying women if they didn't have, they would get a bigger check if they had more children and they didn't have a spouse. Okay, and so it's not some crazy, nut job economic theory to say when you pay someone for something, you see more of that. Now, it's not, just to be clear, when we talk like this, the hypothesis is not that, some 18-year-old young woman is sitting at home and like running calculators and doing computations and present discounted value flows and then saying, oh, this is the optimal thing for my, but no, it's more that like if she's in a relationship and gets pregnant, whereas back in the day, they probably would have gotten married. now they don't need to do that. And particularly if it's not a guy that, she otherwise would have wanted to marry in the first place, because now it's feasible. You can get by. You don't need to go back home and move in with your parents. You can get by because the government starts sending you checks, right? So that's the idea. And then Mr. Erard was, he spent a lot of time focusing on the fact that, under modern wage slavery of the capitalist system, you as a worker, you spend some of your day with the socially necessary labor. You're kind of working, for yourself, but then there's a big chunk of your time that's spent as surplus labor that's, being skimmed off the top by this external exploitive factor. And as we're, recording this, folks, right now, it's April 17th, and the Libertarian would say, yes, exactly, but it's not the capitalists, it's the IRS, right? And so, yes, I agree with a lot of the features of what these two are going to be saying ails our modern society, but I would say the problem is not the particulars they're going to point their finger at. It's more that you could, with a lot of these issues, we can show how it's the modern state and it's, exceeding its rightful duties that is the cause, or at least a very large exacerbating factor. Okay, so let me now sort of take a step back, just as I give you two specific examples of how a libertarian would respond to the types of critiques they just leveled, or their diagnosis of what ails society. Let me just try to give you more of a systematic framework. And so here, I think, is where the libertarian really shines vis-a-vis some of these other perspectives, because I think what libertarianism fundamentally is an analysis or a prescription for the proper role of the state. Okay, and the reason I'm saying the state, in case that language is unfamiliar to you, think of it like with a capital S. I'm not saying the more familiar government with a small g, because in certain circumstances, government could mean like the family or a church. Like if you go to a church and there's elders and they can vote to kick somebody out, like some guy's cheating on his wife, and the elders pull him aside and say, you got to stop. And he says, no, mind your own business. They can just kick him. So a lot of people might say that's the government of the church. So that's not what I mean. That's why I'm explicitly meaning what we have in mind. If we say like, oh yeah, the government took money out of my paycheck, you know what I'm talking about. But the more precise terminology in this literature would be like the state. So that's why I'm using that term. So the idea being like, what is it that the state has the authority to do? And what's interesting is all three of us have held up what's called the classical liberal tradition as sort of our heritage. And now, we sort of have branched off. So that's true that we all like things that came out of the classical liberal tradition. And so today's libertarians are going to say, no, we're the rightful heirs. And the conservatives say they are, and the socialists say they are. So a classic text in this, and by the way, with some of these, because I know this is sort of like an introductory presentation, I'm going to be giving some classic readings in this just in case, I've got 9.5 minutes left. I'm not going to make the decisive case for libertarianism, but I want to just whet your appetite, and then I'll give you ideas for further reading. So here, the classic work is Frederick Bastiat's The Law. That came out in 1850. You can go Google it. It's online for free. It's even translated into English to make it easier in case you don't speak French. And there, he made the basic case that, so he was what we might call a minarchist today. He wasn't an anarchist, that he believed that there was a role for the government or the state, the police and the military and so on. But he thought there's nothing that what's his justification? How does the state arise, at least if it's to do so legitimately? It's that people in their natural condition have certain liberties and rights, and one of them is the right to self-defense, right? So if I own a house and some land and some people come onto my property and I say, get off, and they say no, I can take out a sword or a gun and say, get out and shoot them if they don't leave. But of course, just on one-off interactions, a lot of people, you don't have the power to do that. If there's a gang that shows up, you're kind of helpless. And so Bastiat's idea was people form together, and that's what a government is people delegate what they have the natural right to do to some other group and give them the authority to act on their behalf because of just technological, pragmatic reasons. A lot of times that's more effective. But his point was, if that's what you think where government comes from, at least if it's to be legitimate or just, the government can't do things that would be illegitimate for you to do yourself. You can't delegate powers that you don't yourself possess. And so, for example, so Bastiat had this whole section on what he called legalized plunder. And his idea was, just even if we agree that, oh yeah, it would be nice to have soup kitchens or, relief for the unemployed, the government can't just take money from the public at large through taxation and then fund soup kitchens and so on, because you as an individual, you have the right to give your own money. You know, you see someone destitute or hungry, you can certainly help the person, but you can't go down to your neighbor and say, hey, I'm going to kick in some money. I think you should too, to fund the soup kitchen. And if your neighbor says, no, I don't think so, you can't just take money at gunpoint from your neighbor because you think it's a good cause. And so if none of us can do that individually, how come if we all come together and have a vote and 62% say it, why all of a sudden is that legitimate? All right, so that's Bastiat's point. Another classic work in this tradition would be Ludwig von Mises. So he had a book called Liberalism that came out in 1927. Again, you can go get the PDF of this online. And so and Mises was an economist, and he's famous, as Nathan alluded to. He had a critique of socialism, which I might get to in a few minutes here. But besides just his work as an economist, Mises also was an expositor of the classical liberal tradition. And he made the point here, besides just like defense of property rights and things like that, that the liberal also was for peace, that he was saying ultimately the only way we get the benefits of private property and market economies and the prosperity that we all seem to see goes hand in hand with that is that you can't have warfare. That yes, in extreme cases that might be necessary if some aggressive nations coming in, you got to repel them. But the classical liberal knows that the standard should be peace among nations. That's the only thing conducive to general prosperity. And then because of that, an offshoot was Mises supported democracy because he thought that was the way to avoid civil war, right? That he's saying we've got competing factions domestically. Ultimately, Mises thought the regime that's in power is the one that enjoys public support. And so he said there's no such thing in the long run as an unpopular government, because he meant ultimately the people will overthrow it. And so his point was, the slogan would be ballots instead of bullets, that if you give the people the vote and they can have a peaceful transition of power, that's the way you avoid periodic civil wars. Whereas like under monarchy or other forms of government, Mises argued, if the people don't like the regime, they have no choice but to overthrow it with force, and we don't want that. Okay. A major work that going from classical liberal to now clearly libertarian would be Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty, which came out in 1973. And there, the central principle is the non-aggression principle, right? So before I was saying under Bastiat, the idea was that people can form a government to more efficiently perform tasks of like self-defense and, including the military. So in that conception, yes, there's a role for the state, but it's really just about, preventing contract violations and things like that. But otherwise, once the rules of the game are set up, everything is voluntary in that framework. And the state just kind of acts as a referee. Rothbard and For New Liberty, he has what's called the non-aggression principle, which in modern libertarian circles is pretty popular. And so that's just saying it's immoral to initiate aggression against somebody else. And most people in the abstract think, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I agree with that. But in practice, it has a lot of implications, right? So for example, if someone's a heroin addict, you might think they're making a mistake with their life. You might say, no kid of mine living under my roof is going to use heroin, or I'm kicking them out. You can do that. Certainly, you have the libertarian right to do that because it's your property, but you can't point a gun at somebody else and say, if I catch you using heroin again, I'm going to shoot you, or I'm going to throw you in a cage. And yet that's what drug prohibition means. Okay, so that's the sense in which Rothbard takes this principle that at first blush seems pretty non-controversial and yet reaches pretty radical conclusions, including there are some libertarians that actually are anarchists. Rothbard was one, and he called himself an anarcho-capitalist because he thought you can even privatize services. So not just privatize the roads and the schools, but even the police and the military. So I'm just warning you that's in that strain. So for the rest of tonight's panel, I'm not gonna, I'll try to stick to what most libertarians agree with, and so I won't be defending particular positions that only some do. But I just want to show you that that's in that strain where he thought those principles led. So again, notice just all of this is saying what is the proper scope of government, and so it's making sure the means are legitimate. So I think both of the other panelists tonight, they're going to be talking about all the good things they want to do in society, but the central point for the libertarian is if you don't have the right to do, you can't, the ends don't justify the means, right? That's what it's simply. Okay, so I think partly to explain why the libertarian view is so robust and useful is you just have to know some history. So if you've never seen it, a chart of like per capita economic output is like this for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then like in the 1700s, 1800s, it just goes like that. and it's particularly concentrated like in what we call now the West. And so why is that? And I believe that historians and economic historians and others have convincingly demonstrated that a necessary part of that story was the recognition of and respect for individual rights, limited government, private property, and so forth, the things that are associated with the libertarian conception of the state. A good book on this is Capitalism and the Historians by Friedrich Hayek, and also Bert Folsom, who I know visited your guys' campus earlier this year. He's also got a great little booklet called The Myth of the Robber Barons. So just showing that a lot of maybe what you've been taught about how awful the Industrial Revolution was and people used to be free and happy running around the fields and they had to go work in these dirty factories. No, the reason that people flocked to the cities to go to the factories is they got paid more than they did, working 16-hour days out in the fields. Okay, so that's part of the issue there. Just empirically, we've got some, there's no such thing as a true controlled experiment in the social sciences, but you've got East versus West Germany, North versus South Korea. The liberalization that occurred under China, clearly life is better for the average Chinese person than it was under Mao. Okay, so you have clear-cut examples of similar cultures where one's, socialist or communist, you want to call it, and capitalist. So I think in general, it's pretty obvious that capitalism per se is better than socialism as far as economic output, and also some of the things that Mr. Erard was talking about, like autonomy to evade top-down central planning and micromanagement of your life. I mean, there was nothing more horrifying in terms of top-down control of your life than under regimes that were socialist. So, I guess, he's probably going to get up and argue, well, that wasn't true socialism, or that's not the socialism we wanted. But just in general, if you had to randomly pick a capitalist country or a socialist country from the 20th century to be plopped into, not only are you going to have a higher standard of living, but your freedom of your own individual life is going to be much higher statistically under a capitalist choice. The fundamental issue here, just to conclude, it comes down to incentives and competence, right? So that's the basic theory here, is like, as an economist, to explain why is it that there seems to be this correlation between limited government and nice outcomes, including a large economy, but also individual personal freedom. And just think about it, just in general, if you have somebody that's going to be doing something for you and having control or influence on your life, they need to have the right incentives to do the right thing, and they have to have the competence to do it. And with free markets and individual choice, you're much more likely to get that. If the government comes in to do something, you're not going to have those. So just end with this. Would you want to have an election where there's a campaign and different candidates vie for votes, and then the winner gets to to be your car mechanic, or to choose what apartment you have to live in, or to pick the person you're going to go on a date with next week, right? I think in all those circumstances, that would be absolutely terrifying, right? Just to think it through, to make it real. Like, imagine if that were the case, and you could say, well, no, if somebody was a bad date, then you could just lobby for the next election, or if somebody was a terrible car mechanic, eventually you could. But no, it's just so much better that you have the freedom and the ability just to change, take your business elsewhere, or not go on a second date with a person that you don't click with. Whereas if you had to go through the political process, that would be a nightmare. And yet for those fairly mundane things, we realize how crazy a system that would be to use the political process. But that's the way we're going to decide how much of our income gets taken, or who goes to prison because they're a drug addict, and so forth. So I'm just saying, it's not that the flaws with that system magically get fixed when the problems get really important. No, there's terrible things right now going on in society that they agree with, and I'm saying it's because the government is far too big and powerful. Thanks.
Is this working? Okay, I will go up to the podium. I'm going to field your questions since this is being live streamed. They might not be able to hear you when you state your question, so I'll restate it from the podium for the benefit of our online audience. And who has the first question for our panel? Yes.
So I have a question for Matthew Erard. So suppose I'm producing $100 an hour for my employer, and I get paid $1 an hour.
Okay.
To make up some numbers. So they're now taking the other $99 an hour as profit for themselves and they're paying me like a subsistence wage. What stops me from going to another employer and saying, hey, I will produce $100 an hour for you if you'll pay me $2? And they say, that sounds awesome. We'll make 100 and we'll only have to pay you 2. So now I get paid $2. Then I go to another employer and say, hey, I'm getting paid $2 an hour. How would you like to pay me $3 an hour? And I just go from employer to employer, playing them off against each other. And each time I give them a great deal that I'm going to make a ton of profit off of them. But I'm getting paid a little bit more each time. So eventually I say to one, how would you like, I'll make $100 an hour for you if you'll pay me $90 an hour. And that's still pure profit for them. What stops me from competitively forcing employers to bid against each other like in an auction like that?
So the question basically is, why doesn't competition between parasitical exploiters of labor lead to rising wages and end exploitation?
Well, if there were greater demand for labor than there were for jobs, you might be able to do that. In fact, recently, I guess during 2001, 2020, 21, 22, there was a bit of that phenomenon where there was a higher demand for labor, but that's very rare within capitalism. It's not only almost a systemic constant, but also a matter of political policy that the number of available jobs should be fewer than the number of people looking for jobs. As Biden's Treasury Secretary puts it, unemployment should be a worker discipline device. So on that basis, a worker usually does not have leverage to go to different employers to say that they want a higher wage or they're going to switch. One of the ways that capitalism prevents that is, as I mentioned, having a reserve army of the unemployed, a portion of workers who are excluded from the labor market, who can not only at any moment replace the jobs of employed workers, but put downward pressure on their wages.
Thank you. Next question. Yes.
And so I have a question about marriage in general. Okay, I agree that marriage is an essential institution. It's extremely important in life. But the reason why I lean more towards the libertarian position is that I don't see the government as an efficient instrument to promote that tradition and that institution. So why do you think the government is a good method?
Yeah. So the question is, why do conservatives feel that government has a role to play in supporting marriage?
Great question. So let me begin just by agreeing with what Professor Murphy said. I had it in those lost pages that I forgot to bring up, that I agree with him that it was in my statement about socialism that the welfare state crowds out to some degree the sort of virtues and energy that sustains civil society, and that clearly has happened, or there's strong evidence that happened with marriage. And so it's pretty clear that with the rise, especially with the Great Society welfare programs, that correlated with a kind of tanking of marriage, both slight rise of divorce rates and sort of lowering. The main thing was rise of illegitimacy. Children born out of wedlock. So I am agreeing with that. What I am saying, though, is that marriage involves justice, especially to children. Marriage is not merely a place where two private people say, hey, we love each other, let's get together. I have no plan to regulate people who want to do that or restrict that. You want to tell each other you love each other and commit to each other forever, go ahead. But marriage itself is through every history and every regime we know of, without exception, has had a public provision for the reproduction and care of children, in which there is a kind of favoring and acknowledging of the best arrangement for the care of children especially, but also for the equal caregiving of the spouses. And so my view is that that marriage is a pre-political organization. The state does not create marriage, but it has a duty to acknowledge and ratify marriage, to recognize it. In the same way that you might say we have natural rights, the state does not create the rights. These are pre-political natural things, but that doesn't mean the state's obligation is to affirm the natural realities and goods that are there and to support them. The state doesn't create flourishing, it doesn't create wealth, it doesn't do half these things, but it does have a positive role to play in acknowledging them and protecting them and promoting them, insofar as those protections will promote the flourishing. I always add that in there because conservatism is not an ideology. It's not operating off an abstract blueprint. It's sort of asking, okay, what's our goal here? And then what do we know about the best information we have that's going to promote this? And this is one thing that seems to be a lot of evidence for it. Can I say something on that?
Yeah, just to chime in. So I think Nathan and I are similar on many. So I'm, in my personal life, I think probably very conservative in many issues. I'm a Christian and so forth. So I think a standard libertarian position would be to say, right, exactly everything you say. That's why you don't want to get the state involved, because once you politicize something, it becomes a football. And then, if society moves against you and your particular views about biblical marriage or what have you become in the minority, you're going to lose at the ballot box. And so then you're going to say, oh, geez, I wish we hadn't brought the state in to ratify if it had just been left to the churches. And I realize there's some legal and disposition of property and so forth. So the state can't be completely like, what the heck's marriage? I don't even know what that means. But but the more, once you give the state the power to codify the kind of marriage you think is, leave it to Beaver, then they can also say, 6 people can get married if they all love each other. I mean, why not? And so I'm just saying that it's hard to control the state once you let it in the door.
Can I just say one more thing on that?
Yes.
Is that okay? So the alternative is just to have a Wild West of every individual chooses however they want to live in their own sexual relations, full stop. And maybe there are guardrails on, like, you can't sell your children, can't abuse them, but however you want to, but think about the children. I'm not going to take a show of hands, but how many of you wish you were born to 3 men, 2 women somehow in an arrangement? How many of you wish you were conceived in a petri dish with different genes and raised by 2 same-sex parents? You don't have a mother, just have 2 dads. You don't have a mother, and you don't even know who your biological mother and father are. I mean, some may want that, okay? But I think most of us, when we think about it, would not want that for ourselves. And the reports of the people who are raised this way they're very moving, sad stories. And you can go out and read about them and look at them. So I think for those of you who think, I wouldn't want that for me, I don't know a single kid of a divorced parent, and I'm not saying they're not out there, but I don't know a single one who says, I'm really glad my parents got divorced. That was great. What almost overwhelmingly they say is, that was a very traumatic experience in my life to not have my mother or father there, and for them to love me in this way. So there's a question of what institutional framework we're going to have that we would want for ourselves, and how dare we will for other kids and people the thing we would not. This is just the golden rule, like doing to others what you would have them doing to you. So I'm just saying that this is not maximally invasive, what I'm proposing. I'm not proposing invade houses and tell people how to live their sexual lives. I'm just saying that to have an acknowledgement of this institution, which we know overwhelmingly favors and does justice to children as compared to the alternatives, seems to me a very reasonable thing to do. I know I've said some very controversial things here, but it's open field for questions.
Actually, we had another question about marriage, but before we get to that, I want to invite Mr. Erard. Since he went first, he really didn't have a chance at all to respond to what he heard from the other 2 panelists. So my question for you, Mr. Erard, do you have anything
Sure.
to say about what you heard today from your two colleagues?
Yes, my libertarian colleague referred to taking money from a neighbor that you cannot be expected to go to your neighbor and say, I want $200. I think he put it, and that if the individual can't, then neither should the people be able to do so collectively. Now, when we speak of the collective, though, I'm wondering, did the neighbor acquire that $200 without public education, without roads, without a registered deed to that house that you're going to seek the $200 from? Because I think it's, if they live in society, which presumably they do if they're my neighbor, they've used a whole lot of government services to get where they are as an individual who accumulates $200. It would be terrifically unfair for them to be able to use all of those services and then be freeloaders, refuse to contribute, I think. As to the non-aggression principle, suppose that I didn't recognize the home ownership of people who don't worship Zeus, and I try to evict you on your house as a non-Zeus worshiper. Do I not have, and you resist, do I not have the right to defend myself against your resistance, your lack of recognition to my Zeus claim to your house? I would think that you would probably say that, in fact, I was the aggressor there, that you were the defensive person. But the problem is that the non-aggression principle is just a license for aggression based on a prior theory of entitlement. It does not create a theory of entitlement in itself. To the extent that it does, it's just about maintaining the status quo. In fact, we can look at what Marx called primitive accumulation, where the capitalist class, got most of its assets, and that was primarily through wanton violence. In fact, that was a legal doctrine in this country. It was called the Discovery Doctrine, where we said, the Supreme Court said Indians, Native Americans don't recognize European concepts of property rights. Therefore, you can just take their land. That was the legal doctrine upon which a whole lot of present generational wealth was accumulated on the basis of. I'll stop there. I don't want to take too much time.
Thank you. I don't know, since the.
Do you want me to
I
go,
think
or-
a response is appropriate.
Okay, yes, I'll try to keep it brief because I know we want to foster it back and forth. So yeah, on the donation thing, the government, schools, the roads. Yeah, but of course the libertarian would say, I didn't want the government schools to exist. And also, I mean, this is kind of like a meme that goes around libertarian circles about who would build the roads. It's not that hard to build a road, right? And so it's not that the government has magical properties and there's some secret, society that once you enter political service that comes, this is called asphalt, and then you paint yellow lines. Like, whoa. No, private business could build roads. Okay, so just because the government does something doesn't mean therefore you have to go along with it. Just like if in the depths of the Soviet Union under Stalin, and someone said, "Geez, I don't really like this gulag thing," and he couldn't say, "Oh, well, you're eating from the comrades' farms, so the fact that you ate food that we provided for you means you have to go along with the whole system." I think that's crazy. So he's right about the NAP stuff, the non-aggression principle. Yes, to say you can't initiate aggression against someone presupposes an understanding of what the legitimate property rights are. And Murray Rothbard, in that book I mentioned, For a New Liberty, does go through and give his sort of quick take on how you would know that. But I mean, you could use that against anything. So Mr. Erard is in favor of democracy. And what if I just said, well, what if I think that when someone writes Biden on the ballot, really he was voting for Trump? How do I know? I could believe that. So really, if you think about. So, I mean, with all these things, if you're going to pretend that you don't know who owns the house and it could be because the guy doesn't worship Zeus or not, you can always say that. But no, the community would know that that's not your house just because you believe in Zeus and that guy doesn't, right? So likewise, to say I believe in democracy, like it presupposes we know what it means to vote for somebody. And so you can always keep pushing stuff back. So for the purposes of the 15-minute thing, yeah, I told you what the NAP was. In libertarian theory, it just describes much more deeply how do we know who owns what.
Okay, we have a few questions coming in online. I'm just going to I'll present a few of them. We have someone who's asking, when people all have equal liberty, without government regulation or without tradition to constrain them, what's keeping them from extracting as much as they can from their environment? And that is a question that any of you may respond to.
Can you repeat that?
When people are not constrained by government or tradition, what is keeping them from extracting as much as they can from the environment?
Okay, so I guess it's probably directed at me, and obviously you guys
Well,
want to chime in.
I think it's,
Okay, I mean, because I think he's saying if the government or tradition doesn't, so Mr. Libertarian, aren't we going to rate the planet? And so, so obviously climate change, there's a whole field called free market environmentalism, okay? And just so again, I got to keep the answers brief here. Historically, Chernobyl was a much worse disaster than 3 Mile Island. Nobody really got hurt at 3 Mile Island, okay? So the record, I think, shows capitalist countries have higher environmental quality than socialist ones do. And that's partly just because of the difference in per capita wealth, that, environmental quality is like a luxury good, if you want to think of it that way. And so richer societies can afford to set aside parks and to not dump stuff into the river and to put, scrubbers on smokestacks and so forth. Like right now, the air in China is a lot worse than here. So there's that element. But in general, again, libertarianism is not about no rules or no property rights. Some people think it's like enforcement of property rights on steroids. Okay, so people would own a river. It's not that it would be unowned. It would be private or a corporation or somebody. So if you dump chemicals in the river, you're going to get sued. Just like if you break into a factory and drive off with a forklift, that's not that goes unpunished under libertarian rules.
Can I say a word about that?
Mhm.
So I just to extend that a little bit, it does seem clear that a basic feature of economic analysis is that our actions often have what they call spillover effects, what they call negative externalities and positive externalities. So if someone is, in fact, I don't know, remember the language you used, ravaging nature's, invading, I can't remember what the phrase was, but if someone is using their property in such a way that it's inflicting harm on others, there's a real justice question there that demands a remedy. But it doesn't demand a whole administrative bureaucratic apparatus to sort of manage it. There used to be a robust tort system, and as long as you had a way and developed rules for determining those harms, you could internalize those costs and make polluters pay for the pollution that they're doing in the most effective way. Just to reinforce what Dr. Murphy said, socialist countries have favorite collective ownership. Now, I live on a college campus too, and what I observe on my college campus is you can always tell which houses are the rental houses and which houses are the owned houses. You can always tell. And I've lived in rental houses before because I was in college. And I did not care for that rental house like I did in the house I grew up in and owned. That is, there are incentives to take care of things that you have ownership and dominion over. And collective ownership arrangements almost inevitably undermine those incentives, remove the costs to care, and end up in a lot worse conditions. So the case for property rights is not just egoistic, getting what's my own. It's actually just an institutional arrangement to promote, again, that kind of flourishing that I've been talking about. But then we have limits to those, like a takings clause in the Constitution. The framers were not libertarians. If you need some kind of property for public use and it's really hard to get it through private market negotiations, the government can take it. They got to give you just compensation, but they can take it. And that makes road building a little easier.
I'd just like to note that when we're regarding the comparison between rental homes and houses that you own, though, it's not generally the tenant's responsibility to maintain upkeep of the home. That is the responsibility of the landlord. And so what you are probably noticing is landlords or the landlord-tenant relationship involving less incentive on the part of a landlord to maintain their commercial property than the incentive provided for individual homeowners to maintain their domicile.
Okay. More questions from the audience? Yes.
I want to thank you all for coming. That was really, really great. I always appreciate the historical perspective I get from presentations like this. Your perspectives are often rooted in ideas that are hundreds of years old. That's great. I was wondering, however, if you could speak to today's particular moment. We're living in really unique times, especially technologically, and things like communication and our exposure to the world has just been revolutionized in the last decade or so. And I wonder how your perspectives or ideologies or whatever you can call them, how they're uniquely suited to today's unique moment.
So the question is, how are these perspectives, these political perspectives, uniquely suited to the conditions we face today with the rapidly changing, developing technology? And I hope I captured that properly.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. So real quickly here, I think the standard libertarian view, again, is given how big the U.S. government is right now, it's just in every area it touches, to drastically shrink it. And so I think in terms of our chaotic world, that the U.S. is clearly, I think, losing its status as the global superpower. And so I think a transition to a more libertarian, non-interventionist foreign policy would help that, the growing pains and adjustment there. And then also with all the technological innovations, the rise of blockchain, artificial intelligence, and so on. I've talked to many people in that industry at the company Infinia where I work, and a lot of them think that the U.S. is way behind in terms of smart regulation and keeping up with the technology compared to other jurisdictions around the world. So again, just having a more humble regulatory framework, I think also, which would be in line with standard libertarian theory, would also help the U.S. economy adapt to all these innovations.
I think the social media platforms, the major telecommunications platforms, should be nationalized, should be brought under public control, and when nationalized, should be subject to First Amendment protections. It is a huge problem that the major areas, the major resources for public discourse can be censored at will by private companies on whatever basis they want, whatever political basis or whatever political views they want to favor. There's no accountability there. And to my understanding, there are some conservatives upset with their mistreatment on apps like Facebook that have also come to embrace that view. So that may be an area where we agree. But Elon Musk said he wanted to buy Twitter because, as he put it, it's the public square. And he wanted to ensure that there was a free flow of exchange of ideas on the public square, in the public square. Yet, because he's a temperamental rich boy, he immediately went on to censor criticism of him, censor views he doesn't like, and maintain the so-called public square in a completely capricious way. And there's nothing that the public can do about it. So they should become subject to First Amendment protection as a public utility.
Yeah, I think that it's a large question, and we'd have to identify what the contemporary sort of problems are. So I feel like I just kind of spitballing at a few of them. If you're, it seems to me, and I'm no expert, that if you're really serious about climate change, then you're going to get full board behind nuclear power. And the fact that no one does it tells me they're full of it. They'd rather, like on the left, they want to immiserate like everyone and stop people buying things and inventing things. They're not really serious about stopping climate change because you've got a almost completely clean energy source that's very powerful. And of course, we need to be regulated in other ways. That's how we're moving that way. I would secondly say, agree with Dr. Murphy that I think the size and extent and scope of our government is obscene. The last thing I was going to mention was like repeal the 16th Amendment. Like it is boggling to me that the government is taking You read every day in the paper, they just gave a grant of like so many billions of dollars to this like gender clinic. I'm like, billions of dollars like to study like gender at a clinic. Where'd they get that money? Extracted that money from like business people, families, others. The government has way too much money and access to way too much money. And then you have people empowered to make decisions about things they don't know anything about. How does a bureaucrat know whether we need more shoes versus more coats, or what the optimal, like levels of mercury are in the water, or how effective a mask is, or what shutdowns will do to prevent the spread? Like, we've just come through, I think, hopefully, a lesson about relying on sort of experts ruling us in ways that are frightening. My hope is that whenever you have a free society, and I mean where people are not being canceled, censored, or punished in other ways, I mean, there's some space for privately excluding speech. When you have a free society, it can self-correct. There's something wonderful about a self-correction, and we're seeing that with the whole COVID policy. I think we're seeing it in other ways as well. And so we're seeing these things emerge and adapt, and we can't predict them. I'm amazed how pervasive, how quickly people are like flipping, for example, on what just 5 years ago was a consensus, that the best care for teenagers was gender-affirming care, was to permanently sterilize and mutilate them. That was standard policy. Britain has ceased it entirely. Scandinavia has limited it. Studies coming out everywhere that this is not helpful to teenagers. America's a holdout on this. But I'm saying, like, that's because you had enough freedom to do the research, do the studies, and then so there's no easy way to do this. I think there's no way through our problems, no way around them but going through them, and all of us being responsible citizens and agents and doing our best to know these issues and sort of promote, I think, the best and most sound policies. Not to sound, like a cliche, but I just don't see any better way around that.
So I have a question for our panelists, and this will be the last question. And then I'm going to invite every one of you to have the last word. So I guess my question is, I was listening to you about the principles which you believe in, and that you're all dissatisfied with the status quo. Do you have some concrete ideas for how we go from where we are to where you would like us to be? Is there some kind of reasonable, logical way to make a transition to your ideal?
Sure. So I'll go first. I mean, yeah, the obvious thing would be cut government spending, reduce taxes, reduce regulation, privatize a lot of government assets. So just a lot of the areas where the government right now has a big footprint, pull it back. And again, it's a lot of these areas, like it grew, it's steadily grown through the 20th and the 21st century. So it wasn't always the case that Washington had so much power. Like back, the original conception, I think Dr. Schleuter mentioned, was federalism. It used to be that the individual states had a lot more power vis-a-vis the federal government, and then over time that shifted. So I mean, that's the goal. However, having said all that, I'm very pessimistic about whether that's going to work. I don't think many people are very excited about Trump versus Biden, and wow, I'm really excited about my candidate. It's just more voting because I can't stand the other guy, and so I just become very disillusioned myself about the political process at the national level. So I think realistically, unfortunately, I think there's going to be a major economic crisis, and that might allow some more de facto, like other, state level jurisdictions kind of doing their own thing, relatively speaking, and the Fed's just not being able to stay on top of it because there's so much chaos. So that's not a happy thing I'm seeing, but I'm just being honest with you.
Well, I think it's interesting that you're pessimistic about the de-evolution of federal power back to states' rights, but not pessimistic about the de-evolution of monopoly capital back to a free enterprise system. I would say it would be much harder to create a so-called free market in the libertarian sense than it would be to create a socialist society, because socialist society can be created by pushing the existing ruling class out of power, by dispossessing it of power. Libertarianism would keep the same ruling class, and that ruling class does not want free enterprise. It wants big government to insulate it from competition and subsidize it. What else was I going to say? I think I was just going to respond to that comment.
I think we could have an instructive conversation about corporate capitalism and whether that corporate form is actually an expression of free market principles and promotes flourishing. I think Bob would be quite open to that also. So there's something to what you say. I guess I would say that I think pessimism or cynicism are not really emotions that we can afford. I think that they're always a function of expecting too much. Idealists are always pessimists. Like they have such high expectations that they're always just kind of angry and bitter and disappointed how bad everything is. And I think in part we need to kind of be a little more realistic and look around and see much of the good that's around us and not just the bad. And I see many opportunities for that give me hope that we're not going to have some beautiful, spontaneous order of flourishing people. Probably not my lifetime, probably not in this world. But I see lots of signs recently of sort of growing initiative to sort of address some of our biggest problems. And I guess I would encourage each of you, myself and all of us, to be the best people we can be, to demand the most of ourselves, to not just simply consumers of the silos that we inhabit and just listening to the things they say, but to really try to develop and grow and be critical of manipulation, left, right, center, wherever it's coming from, to try and model in our own lives and to live well and to flourish well and do the part that you were made to do. And again, I know that sounds like a cliche, but I think that's where the most important work is.
Okay, so now I want to invite, I'm sorry, Matthew, go ahead.
In responding to Dr. Murphy's comment, I think I forgot to respond to your initial question, which was the ways of bringing about that kind of social change. Certainly, it's a tall order for those of us who are trying to overthrow capitalism. But the main power that the working class has, is being the immense majority of the society, but it also has the power to withhold its labor. Capitalism cannot survive a day without the working class working for it. And if the working class withholds its labor, it can shut down the entire system. Certainly, it's the position of all socialists that you need democracy, that you need to have the majority or at least a substantial plurality on your side. But at least among the Marxists, among us, very few of us think that it's very likely that you could establish socialism through elections. The principal reason for that being that if we got to the point where the working class was going to dispossess the ruling class of power, that would be the end of elections. History has shown that the ruling class always will choose even fascism over allowing a workers' republic to develop. I think the working class exercises most of its power at the point of production, not in the voting booth. And I think critical to raising the class struggle to a political struggle is breaking with the Democratic Party, obviously the Republican Party as well as vehicles for our political inspirations, and establishing a political independence as a class, democratizing the trade unions as well, getting rid of the bureaucratic layer that controls them, and restoring workers' democracy is critical as well.
So now I invite our panelists to make a brief final summation of the question. which of these ideologies does the most promote human freedom and flourishing? And we'll go in reverse order, starting with Dr. Murphy.
Okay, great. So again, thanks everybody for your attention. I think we all enjoyed this and learned from it. So big picture, I just want to say that I would, from my perspective here, what these two gentlemen are trying to achieve, like standard libertarian theory, allows and accommodates for that. So in other words, if the particular stresses and emphases that they're placing on how they view society are correct, then standard libertarian framework allows for that. So for example, Professor Schleuter at the end of his opening remarks, when he listed his, like, so what do we do? What are some action items? He said school choice. Okay, so if you don't know that, that just means that people who have kids going to public schools can take the tax money that's earmarked for them and then spend it on a private alternative. And so if you got the government out of schooling altogether and you didn't either didn't have property taxes or greatly reduced them because the government's not doing too much except, you know, enforcing contracts and keeping out foreign invaders, then that problem kind of disappears. If everything's private school anyway, then that's not really an issue. Right to work, again, that's counteracting a lot of the stuff from like the labor legislation under the New Deal. That's what right to work means. It's counteracting some of that stuff. So if you got rid of all that regulation, I don't want to give you a heart attack, Mr. Erard, then that's automatically you get what that is. Dismantling the administrative state, he said, the end, again, that's standard libertarian. The only thing where it's a little bit squishy is the marriage stuff. And like I said, I think at least one strain of libertarianism says just get the government out of marriage altogether, leave it to the churches and whatever. And to the extent there's property issues, well, then you can have separate contracts tied to that. But, you know, marriage per se is a religious thing. And then real quickly here, I know we will respect your time. As far as for Mr. Erard, I would say, look, under a standard libertarian framework, workers can buy out their employers. Workers can go save up over time and buy the shares if it's a publicly traded company. So there's nothing stopping workers from taking over their factory or whatnot. And the fact that empirically they don't, I think is because in general that there's different types of people with different aptitudes. And like the people that are good at going to the assembly line and making cars are not necessarily the right people to decide strategically what types of models should we introduce and how many pickups should we make, the sorts of things that like the CEO and the shareholders do. Okay. And so that's my my position here in summation.
Thank you. And Dr. Schleuter?
Just very quickly, we are all the beneficiaries of a great experiment in self-government. And that cost many lives and blood, sweat, and tears for us to even be here freely having this conversation. And that experiment is very fragile. It was unique in the history of the world, and it's always under threat. And both libertarian, and it was not a libertarian experiment, it was not a socialist experiment. And I think both of those ideologies latch on to certain elements that are maybe like true within that experiment, and they wrench it out of context, and they threaten to pull that whole fabric apart. So we've got something very fragile and precious here. And I would say that we need to have a sense of gratitude before anything else. Okay, we've got something that we didn't make, that we got. And when you're grateful for something, then you're more careful for it. And you're not ready to take sort of abstract experiments and sort of ripping it apart for the sake of an idea. You are careful to be a steward of that thing. And that's fundamentally what I'm advocating for.
Thank you, Mr. Erard.
Well, first, I just wanted to remark it is peculiar to me that libertarians support right to work, because I thought that they supported freedom of contract. I would think that if the libertarians want to keep government out and want private citizens to be able to enforce contracts, right to work would be something that they support. But more generally, I think a major difference with libertarianism is that libertarians want to minimize authoritarianism in the public sector and maximize it in the private sector. And socialists, we want to eliminate authoritarianism in both. We want to eliminate an authoritarian government. We want to eliminate the authoritarianism of your boss in the workplace too. We do not like authoritarianism of any kind anywhere. And in fact, that's the reason that the term libertarian as a political ideology refers to a form of socialism everywhere in the world except for the US and Canada. It's even the first use of it, I think, was Les Libertaires, and a French magazine advocating socialist anarchism. As to, what was I going to say? As to unraveling the thread of society, which was, I think that was your metaphor, and that was the same metaphor used by Edmund Burke. Who was the father of conservatism. He wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France, criticizing the speed and timing of the French Revolution. But even he recognized that was the eventual tide of history, that this form of government or something similar to it would be something that we would progress to eventually. He just thought that we were pulling society apart at the seams too quickly. And certainly the founding fathers recognized that too, that the time for tradition was over, that the divine right of kings, which was everyone believed in as dogma before that, was outdated, and that a new type of society could be imagined and be created. So I think if we're going to be like the founding fathers, we should not cling to tradition. We should not say that we should stop history or stop trying to improve and transform society at that particular point in the 18th century. I think to be like the founding fathers is to continuously move forward. And that means moving forward from an outdated system that's outlived its purpose.
Well, thank you all, gentlemen. It's been very informative and interesting, and thank you all for coming tonight. And I have no additional Freedom Seminar events to announce for this academic year, but please be aware that this will start again in the fall. Thank you.